While the world waits for potential Iranian retaliation to U.S. strikes, the conflict could have a major effect on oil and gas prices in the U.S. Right now, oil prices are pretty flat, but that could change quickly if Iran decides to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Let's bring in the head of petroleum analysis at GasBuddy, Patrick Haan, for more on that. Patrick, thanks for joining us. Why do you think these U.S. strikes on Iran haven't led to a surge in oil prices so far?
Well, it's kind of interesting watching the dynamic here because last night in electronic trading, oil prices did jump that 4%, but they've given up all of that gain. And I think the market's very skeptical that Iran is going to be able to even remotely pull off a potential shutdown of the Strait of the Hormuz. In addition, such a shutdown would also hurt their main client, in this case, China, who receives a lot of oil from Iran through the Strait of Hormuz. So it's just incredibly difficult to pull this off. In addition, so many countries rely on this waterway. About 20% of the world's oil flows through this. And so I think there'd be a lot of upset parties that would likely push back and further isolate Iran. So this is a very difficult position to be in for Iran. They don't have a whole lot of good answers. They may talk about potentially shutting it down. That could inspire a jump in the price of oil, but I don't know that they'll be able to pull that off. And I think the oil market is reading into that as well.
President Trump just posted on Truth Social, "Everyone keep oil prices down. I'm watching. You're playing right into the hands of the enemy. Don't do it." What do you make of that?
Well, it's certainly very interesting that the president would be weighing in on something that's a global commodity here and just kind of essentially saying, well, don't do this. Well, the market is going to do what it's going to do, whether that's lower oil prices or higher. The balance of demand and supply changes when there are attacks in the Middle East, and there's simply no way around it. The risk has elevated of additional attacks. The Middle East is home to many of the largest oil producers in the world. And so the president is essentially asking for the market not to react to the way things have developed. That's virtually impossible. And oil prices will continue to move depending on the actions of what happened in the Middle East. If there's a slight shift in the risk calculus, that could send oil up. If there are de-escalations, that could send oil back lower again.
So how critical is the Strait of Hormuz to global oil prices? And what happens if Iran shuts it down?
Well, it certainly would be vital. I mean, Saudi Arabia, one of the world's largest oil producers, relies heavily on the Strait of Hormuz. So the Saudis would have a very big problem on their hands if Iran were to try and shut this down. Other oil producers as well would have a big challenge. The UAE also relying on the Strait of Hormuz. We're talking about millions of barrels of oil that flow through the Strait of Hormuz every day. And so this would be very problematic, especially for the Saudis. We're talking about 5 to 8 million barrels a day. That would be at stake here. The Saudis do have an alternative that they could send to the Red Sea, but that pipeline is relatively small. So this would be very problematic. But again, oil markets shrugging off the potential that Iran could actually do such a major maneuver. So we'll have to see. But oil markets would be very rattled if Iran does try to make a movement to shut down the Strait of Hormuz.
Up to 50% of China's oil imports come through the Strait of Hormuz, too. So can Iran afford to upset China?
They really can't. I mean, China is really the only large purchaser of Iranian crude oil, which has been heavily sanctioned by many other countries. That's why Iran is now so reliant on China. So to upset China would also inflict even more damage onto Iran's economy. And that's probably why they may only talk about it and they may not even be able to pull this off. So keep an eye. China has been a huge buyer of cheap Iranian crude oil, much of that oil being sold at a massive discount because Iran is heavily sanctioned by much of the Western world.
All right, Patrick Haan, we appreciate your time today. Thank you.